Why had the room gone so quiet? Sarah Mitchell felt the silence press against her skin like a weight. The briefing table was crowded with men, commanders, instructors, officers with weathered faces, but none of them would meet her eyes. It wasn't new. She felt this silence before. Each time she'd submitted her application for SEAL training. 4 times the same rejection, 4 times the same words. Female candidates do not meet requirements. Cold letters that stripped months of preparation into a single sentence. But today was different. Because today the silence wasn't bureaucratic, it was desperate. Sirens had torn through camp just 20 minutes earlier, not the routine kind that warned of drills or training mishaps. These were jagged alarms, urgent, bleeding through the walls. Real. The kind of sound that shifts the air itself, that tells every soldier without explanation, this is no exercise, this is life or death. Sarah had been on the range with a squad of recon Marines when the sound first split the morning. At first, no one moved. Training had taught them discipline, wait, confirm, then act. But within seconds, gunfire confirmed what the sirens had already promised. The base was under attack. She remembered the flash of instinct, dropping behind cover, heart pounding, her rifle in her hands before her brain caught up. The echoes of automatic fire rolled across the compound, ugly, uneven, too close. That was when the radio chatter broke through. Multiple hostiles inside the perimeter. Armed, coordinated. This is not a drill. Now she stood in the command building's observation tower, facing men who had refused her 4 times. But none of them were saying no anymore. Mitchell, the voice was sharp, commanding. Sergeant Major shoved a rifle into her hands, not the standard issue M4 she trained with daily, but the heavy, unmistakable M107A1. 50 caliber, long-range anti-materiel, a sniper's weapon. Its weight was familiar, comforting, dangerous. "You've got 4 minutes," said, eyes unblinking. 17 targets, distances from 700 to nearly 1,500 meters. Wind is shifting. We don't have another shooter who can make those shots. Show us what you can do. The words hit harder than the weapon in her arms. 17 shots, 17 impossible targets. And all at once, Sarah understood why the room had gone so quiet. It wasn't because they doubted her anymore. It was because they had no one else left to call. Her rejection letters had never really stung in isolation. She told herself that. Paper was paper, words on a page, but it was the accumulation that built into something heavier. The knowledge that she had deployed 4 times into combat zones, returned with commendations, proven her strength and skill under fire, and still, they had told her she wasn't enough. Physiological limitations, one letter had read. Lacks endurance required for special warfare, another said. They never mentioned the truth, that she was a woman in a place where women had never been allowed. Sarah had stopped trying to explain, even to herself, why she kept applying. Because every time she thought of quitting, she remembered the silence of her first firefight in Syria. The moment after her squad had been pinned down by a sniper, and the only shot that mattered was hers. 400 meters, shifting wind, dust storm rising. One trigger pull that saved 3 Marines. She remembered their eyes after disbelief, then relief, then something like respect. It wasn't gender. It wasn't politics. It was survival. And survival, she knew, didn't care about requirements on paper. Now, survival had walked into camp. From the tower, she could see the chaos unraveling. Smoke coiled from the logistics building. A helicopter sat wounded near the landing pad, tail rotor shredded. Figures darted between structures, some friendly, some hostile. She forced herself to breathe, to slow the racing of her pulse. Long-range shooting wasn't about adrenaline. It was about control. Control over body, weapon, and time itself. 17, repeated, his voice harder now, pressing the reality into her bones. You neutralize those threats or this base falls. Sarah looked through the scope. The first target was already in her. Rooftop of the communications building, 934 meters, Enemy sniper, clean angle on the main approach. His posture was relaxed, too relaxed. He thought he had the advantage. She exhaled, adjusted 2 clicks right for wind, one for elevation. Her body remembered this. Her deployments had carved it into muscle memory. Her finger tightened, a squeeze, never a pull. The recoil thundered through her shoulder. 1.2 seconds later, the insurgent crumpled backward. "One down," she whispered. No cheers, no applause, just the empty snap of silence before the next shot. What the men in that room didn't know, what Sarah had never told them, was that she hated this silence most of all. The silence after a kill. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't regret. She made peace with those years ago. No, it was the haunting quiet that reminded her she could never go back to being the girl who had once wanted nothing more than to serve, to belong, to prove herself. Every shot pulled her further from that innocence. And still she kept firing. Target 2, Logistics Building, 1,243 meters, window shadow barely visible. He was aiming at the medevac zone. American lives pinned down, her breath steadied. She squeezed. Impact, target collapsed out of sight. 2 down, 15 to go. Her radio crackled. Confirmed, keep going, Mitchell, you're buying us time. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, do they even know who's saving them right now? She knew the answer, probably not. To them she was just the shooter in the tower, anonymous, functional, disposable. But to her, every shot was more than survival. It was a message. I can do this. I've always been able to do this. You just never let me prove it. By the 7th shot, her shoulder burned from this recoil. By the 10th, sweat had soaked the inside of her uniform despite the coastal wind. But each shot was clean. Each one confirmed. The targets fell, one by one, like dominoes against inevitability. The men in the tower stopped whispering doubts. They just watched, listened, waiting for the next confirmation. At her 12th shot, his voice broke through again. Mitchell, you realize what you're doing right now. She didn't answer. Not yet, because the real question wasn't whether she realized it. It was whether they did. By the time she sighted the 15th target, a runner breaking across the western perimeter, Sarah's chest was tight with something more than fatigue. Hope. Hope that maybe, after today, no woman would ever hear the words, not qualified, for the simple fact of being born female. Hope that skill would finally speak louder than silence. Her scope tracked the moving figure, breath steady, heart heavy. Shot fired. Impact confirmed. And then came the 17th, the one that mattered most. 1,467 meters, fatting light, moving target, crosswind that shifted every 5 seconds. The kind of shot that even the most seasoned snipers hesitate to attempt. Her hands didn't tremble. They couldn't. But inside, a storm raged, every rejection letter, every silent briefing, every time her worth had been measured and dismissed. She let them burn inside her, then she let them go. Slow exhale, crosshairs aligned. Finger tightened. The shot split the evening. And in the silence that followed, the impossible became real. 17. The silence after the 17th shot stretched longer than the bullet's flight. It felt like the whole base was holding its breath. Then, as though a switch had been thrown, voices erupted over the radio. Confirmations, cheers, the sharp edges of disbelief breaking into relief. All targets neutralized. Repeat, all targets neutralized. Observation tower, outstanding work. Sarah lowered the rifle slowly, almost reluctantly. Her hands lingered on the weapon's cold frame, as though part of her wasn't ready to let go. They had been heavy at first, but now it felt like an extension of herself, as though the 17 shots hadn't come from steel and powder at all, but from her. She should have felt triumphant. She should have felt vindicated. Instead, she only felt empty. The silence she hated most of all had returned. Boots pounded up the tower stairs. The door burst open and was the first inside. His face was unreadable. He'd seen every shot through a spotting scope, heard every confirmation over the radio, but still his eyes scanned her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You realize what you just did?" he asked. His tone wasn't disbelief, it was something quieter, something closer to awe. Sarah didn't answer, because even if she did, what words could fit? Behind him came Colonel Hayes, breathless, flanked by two officers she didn't know. Their faces told the story, somewhere between relief and shock, as though they just witnessed a rule of physics rewritten. "You saved this base," Hayes said finally, his voice low. "You don't understand yet, but those 17 shots will be studied for decades." Sarah's gaze drifted out the window. Smoke still curled from the logistics building. Medics were sprinting with stretchers toward the landing pad. Soldiers who'd been trapped minutes ago now moved freely, some lifting their helmets skyward in wordless thanks. She wanted to feel their relief. Instead, she felt the weight of every letter she'd ever received, every denial still lodged like shrapnel in her chest. Why did it take this? Why did it take blood, chaos, and 17 bodies to prove what she'd always known? Hours later, the base had begun to stabilize. The insurgent threat was gone, but the evidence of their violence lingered everywhere. Broken glass crunched under boots. The acrid scent of smoke clung to uniforms. Helicopters thudded overhead, ferrying the wounded to emergency care. Sarah sat on the observation tower's steel steps, rifle across her knees. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her shoulder bruised from recoil. Yet no one told her to leave. No one asked her to return to training duty. Instead, soldiers passed her quietly, some nodding, some whispering. Recognition without ceremony. For the first time in years, no one was ignoring her. But inside, conflict churned. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To prove she belonged among the best. To silence the letters, the doubts, the walls that had been built too high. And yet, the faces of the 17 she had killed flickered behind her eyes. Not their details, she hadn't seen them clearly enough. Just the fact of them. Human lives, ended by her trigger finger. The contradiction weighed heavy. Celebrated for taking life, but fighting her whole career to prove her own. It was nearly midnight when she was summoned. The command building still hummed with controlled chaos, radios crackling, maps spread across tables, officers bent in hurried conferences. But in the far room, quieter than the rest, a screen glowed with the Pentagon seal. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," Colonel Hayes said, motioning her forward. "Someone wants to speak with you." Her boots felt heavier with each step. She didn't know whether to brace for reprimand or recognition. The screen flickered and an admiral's face filled the room, stern, weathered, commanding. "This is Admiral, Naval Special Warfare Command," the voice said. Sarah straightened instinctively, heels clicking together. "I understand you've applied for SEAL training before," the Admiral continued. His tone was matter-of-fact, but there was no missing the weight beneath the words. 4 times, 4 rejections, cited reasons, physical fitness requirements not met, psychological endurance in question. The words stung, even though she'd heard them all before. Then the Admiral leaned closer. "And yet today you demonstrated precision shooting capabilities that exceed what we typically see from SEAL-qualified snipers. You neutralized 17 targets under combat conditions most would call impossible. No misses. No hesitation. Staff Sergeant, your performance today has already reached my desk, and I'll be direct. It changes things." Sarah's throat tightened. She said nothing. "Effective immediately," the Admiral said. "I am inviting you to Naval Special Warfare Command for evaluation. You will report within 72 hours. This is not a courtesy. This is an order. Your performance today proves capability is not limited by gender, and you have earned the chance to prove the rest." The words hung in the air like thunder. When the call ended, the room remained silent. Was the first to break it, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You did it, Mitchell." But Sarah shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I did what had to be done. That's not the same as proving anything." Her words surprised even her, because deep down she knew this wasn't triumph. It was only the beginning of another test. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of generators and the distant whir of helicopters still ferrying the wounded. Each time she closed her eyes, the targets reappeared, not as faceless silhouettes but as questions. Who were they? Why here? Who had sent them? But beneath those questions was another, heavier one. Had she finally broken the wall, or had she just stepped into another one? At dawn, she rose before reveille. The base was quiet now, almost eerily so. She walked the perimeter, boots crunching over the dirt, letting the morning air cool the fever still lingering in her blood. Soldiers nodded as she passed, some whispered, one even saluted. She returned it but uneasily. Recognition was still a foreign language to her. Word had spread beyond the base. News outlets were circling. Military observers from allied nations whispered her name, the Marine who hit 17 impossible shots. But Sarah avoided them all. She sat on a bench outside the armory, her rifle disassembled across her lap, hands working the familiar rhythm of cleaning and reassembly. It grounded her, reminded her that behind the headlines and whispers, she was still just a soldier. Still the same woman who'd been told 4 times she wasn't enough. That afternoon approached her. He sat beside her without asking, watching her hands work the bolt carrier with practiced care. "You should be proud," he said finally. Sarah didn't look up. "Pride doesn't bring back the ones we lost yesterday." Nodded, "True, but neither does doubt. Don't rob yourself of what you did out there. You didn't just stop an attack. You proved something a lot of people swore was impossible. That matters, Mitchell, maybe more than you realize." Sarah paused, barrel in her hand. Her reflection warped across its steel surface. "Or maybe it just means the bar is higher now," she said softly. "For me, for everyone who comes after." Didn't argue, he didn't need to. They both knew she was right. That night she packed. Her orders were clear: Naval Special Warfare Command, 72 hours, evaluation. Each item folded into her bag carried the weight of years. Combat deployments, applications, moments of doubt and resilience. She slipped the final item in, a small, creased photo of her squad from Syria, the ones who had believed in her before anyone else. She paused, staring at it for a long moment. Then zipped the bag shut. As the transport lifted off the next morning, carrying her toward the very place that had refused her 4 times, Sarah stared out the window at the shrinking outline of camp. The smoke had cleared, the sirens had stopped, life on the base would return to routine soon. But she knew her life would never return to what it had been. Not after 17 shots. Not after silence had finally given way to something louder. Hope. The plane touched down in Virginia just before dawn. The tarmac was slick with dew, and the air smelled faintly of salt drifting in from the Chesapeake. Sarah Mitchell stepped down the ramp with her pack slung over one shoulder, boots hitting the ground like the beat of a drum she had waited years to hear. This was Naval Special Warfare Command, the place that had rejected her 4 times, the place that had told her flatly she didn't belong. Now they had ordered her here. The compound was quiet at that hour, but not still. Shadowed figures jogged in formation down the outer road. Somewhere inside, Sarah could hear the thud of weights dropping, the bark of instructors. She knew the sound of exhaustion when she heard it. A lieutenant met her at the edge of the tarmac. Staff Sergeant Mitchell. His eyes flicked over her, the uniform, the bearing, the calm in her step. But his voice betrayed something else. Surprise. She nodded. "Follow me." They didn't waste time with ceremony. Within an hour she stood in a bare room before 3 officers, 2 men, 1 woman. The admiral who had spoken to her through the screen wasn't here. These were gatekeepers, evaluators. Their job wasn't to welcome, it was to measure. One of them, Commander Everett, leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "You know why you're here, Sergeant." Sarah kept her posture rigid. "Yes, sir, to be evaluated for special warfare training." His eyes narrowed slightly. 17 confirmed kills, extreme ranges, under combat stress. That record is already under review across every branch. He leaned forward. But don't mistake that for automatic acceptance. 17 shots don't erase 17 years of data that tell us women fail this program. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her tone even. "Respectfully, sir, 17 shots saved an entire base. That's not data, that's reality." The room was silent for a beat. Then the woman on the panel, Commander Torres, spoke, her voice sharper. "Reality is this: the program will not bend for you. It will break you or it will accept you. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am." The evaluation began before the sun was fully up. She was issued a standard pack, 70 pounds, and ordered to ruck 10 miles along the coast. No formation, no encouragement, no clock to chase. Just her, the sand, and the weight. Every step sank deep into the shoreline, soft ground pulling at her boots. The pack straps cut into her shoulders. Her legs burned. At mile 3, a voice echoed in her head. "Female candidates do not meet requirements." At mile 5, "We're not being discriminatory, we're being realistic." By mile 7, she was running on anger alone. Each rejection let her replayed with every pounding step. She leaned into it, let it drive her forward. At mile 10, when she staggered past the marker, 2 instructors stood waiting. One scribbled on a clipboard. Neither looked impressed. "Drop your pack, Sergeant," one said flatly. "Hydrate, you've got 20 minutes, then the pool." The pool had always been the crucible. Drown-proofing, underwater swims, tests designed not to measure skill but to push fear to its limits. Sarah tied her ankles and wrists as ordered, feeling the coarse rope bite against her skin. She stepped to the edge, inhaled slowly, and fell forward into the water. Silence. The pool swallowed sound, leaving only the rush of bubbles and the drum of her heart. She sank, body locked, lungs already tight. The old fear stirred, not of drowning but of failing, of surfacing too soon, of giving them the proof they wanted that she didn't belong. But she refused. She angled her body, let her weight carry her down, then kicked upward just enough to rise without breaking rhythm. Minutes blurred. Every instinct screamed to surface, to breathe. But she clung to control, counting in her head, stretching each second. When the instructor's pole finally tapped her shoulder, permission to rise, she broke the surface, gasping. "Again," the voice said coldly. And she did. Again and again. Until her lungs burned like fire and her body shook with exhaustion. By the third day, her muscles screamed from lack of rest. Her arms trembled as she hauled logs with other candidates. Her throat was raw her hands blistered from endless push-ups in sand. But worse than the pain were the stares. Most of the men barely spoke to her. Some ignored her entirely. A few let their doubts slip in whispers she wasn't meant to hear. "She won't last the week. They'll cut her at the first failure. 17 shots do mean she's one of us." The words dug deeper than the rope burns on her wrists, not because they surprised her, but because she'd once whispered them to herself. That night, lying in the barracks, Sarah stared at the ceiling, muscles twitching with fatigue. Around her, snores filled the room. Sweat and salt hung in the air. She thought of camp, the tower, the smoke, the silence after the 17th shot. And she thought of the photo folded in her pack, her squad in Syria, the ones who had believed. Her chest tightened. She whispered into the dark, "I won't quit, not here, not again." On the 6th day, she was summoned again, not to the pool, not to the beach, to a room with a single chair. Commander Torres sat across from her, No clipboard, no stopwatch, just eyes that studied her like a puzzle not yet solved. "Why do you want this, Mitchell?" Torres asked finally. The question was simple. The weight behind it was. Sarah hesitated. The answers she'd given before felt hollow now. To prove myself, to break barriers, to serve at the highest level. But beneath all of it was something quieter, something harder to admit. "Because I'm tired of silence," Sarah said finally. Her voice surprised even her. "Tired of being told what I can't do. Tired of watching doors close when I know I can carry the weight. I don't need recognition. I don't need glory. I just need the chance to stand in the same fire and not be turned away before I burn." Tor's expression didn't change, but her eyes softened just slightly. "Then understand this," she said quietly. "The fire you're asking for doesn't care if you're man or woman. It doesn't care if you've been rejected 4 times or 40. It only cares if you survive it. Can you?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes, ma'am." That night, as she lay in her bunk, she turned the words over and over in her mind. "Can you survive it?" Her body ached, her lungs still raw from the pool, her legs trembling from miles of sand. But somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered. Not pride, not yet. Hope. The same hope that had carried her through the 17th shot. The hope that this time silence wouldn't win. The bell hung in the courtyard like a promise, or a threat. Every candidate knew what it meant. Ring it once and the pain ended. Ring it twice and you got warm food, dry clothes, and a ticket home. Sarah tried not to look at it, but she felt its weight pressing on her even when she turned away. By the start of Hell Week, 12 men had already rung out. The brass bell sang across the compound like a hymn to surrender. She told herself she wouldn't. Not after everything. Not after 17 shots had dragged her into this place. But she also knew the instructors didn't need the bell. They had other ways of making candidates disappear. It began with cold. The Pacific swallowed them in the first hour, freezing water, waves slamming bodies into one another, instructors yelling above the surf. "Link arms. Stay together. You quit. You let your team drown." Sarah's teeth rattled against the shoulder of the man beside her. His breath came ragged, sharp. She couldn't tell if it was fear or hypothermia. Maybe both. Minutes bled into an hour, then longer. When they finally staggered out, clothes dripping, they were ordered straight into the sand. Push-ups, flutter kicks. "Welcome to the grinder," an instructor barked. Sand coated every inch of skin, turning sweat into grit. Sarah's arms trembled. Her legs burned. She glanced sideways. Most of the men weren't looking at her. They were just trying to survive. That was the first lesson Hell Week taught. Suffering erases differences. By the second night, sleep deprivation set in. They were allowed maybe 90 minutes in total, spread across days. Time bent, warped, collapsed. Sarah found herself hallucinating, a light flickering where there was none, a shadow stretching the wrong way. Once she swore she heard her father's voice, though he'd been gone for years. She kept moving anyway, kept rowing the boat across endless surf drills, her blistered hands locked around the oar, kept running under logs heavier than her body, kept pushing through mud that swallowed boots to the knees. But the doubts never stopped whispering, "They'll break you. You don't belong here. You're only here because of those shots." And sometimes, when exhaustion blurred the world, she almost believed it. The lowest point came on the 4th day. They'd been ordered back into the surf at midnight. The water was black and endless, the horizon swallowed by fog. They linked arms again, 6 candidates across, shivering as waves broke over their heads. Sarah's body screamed to give up. Every muscle cramped, every nerve burned from the cold. Her lungs felt tight, as though even breathing took more effort than she had left. The man beside her, Martinez, muttered through chattering teeth, "I can't do it. I can't." "Stay with me," Sarah whispered, her own voice cracked. "One more wave, just one." When the wave hit, Martinez went under. She kicked down, grabbed his collar, yanked him back up into line. The instructors saw. They always saw. One of them leaned in close, his voice harsh over the surf. "Why save him, Mitchell? He's dead weight. You want to prove you belong. Let him drown. Prove you're stronger." Her jaw clenched. She shook her head. Strength wasn't leaving someone behind. She learned that in Syria, learned it in Iraq. She wasn't about to forget it here. She pulled Martinez against her shoulder, held the line as the waves battered them. He coughed, sputtered, but stayed upright. And somewhere in the darkness, she realized the instructors weren't just testing her. They were watching how others responded to her. By dawn, 3 more had rung the bell, but Martinez hadn't. He caught her eye as they dragged their bodies across the grinder again. He didn't speak. He just nodded, sand clinging to his face, eyes heavy with gratitude. It wasn't respect, not yet, but it was something. On the 5th night, Sarah nearly broke. They'd run for miles with boats balanced on their heads. The weight ground into her neck, spine screaming, knees buckling. Every step was agony. The instructors jogged beside them, shouting reminders that quitting was easy. The bell is right there, waiting. Her vision blurred. Her knees gave. The boat tilted, slammed against her shoulder. For a second, she thought she was done. She fell. The instructors pounced, circling like sharks. "Mitchell's down" didn't last just like we said. The words cut sharper than the pain. Her hands clawed at the sand. She could hear boots stomping, laughter cutting into the night. And then a hand gripped her arm. Martinez. He hauled her up, shoved her back under the boat. "Don't you quit now," he hissed, breath ragged. "Not after you saved me." Something ignited in her chest. Not pride, not ego, responsibility. She staggered forward, legs trembling, head pressed under the weight. The instructors kept shouting. But for the first time, the voice that cut through louder wasn't theirs. It was her own. "I will not break, not here, not now." When Hell Week finally ended, they were down to less than half the original class. The courtyard was silent as the survivors stood in formation, eyes hollow, bodies wrecked. Sarah could barely feel her legs. Her skin was raw from salt and sand. But when the commanding officer stepped forward, his gaze swept across them and lingered just for a moment on her. "You've endured," he said. His voice was flat, but the words landed heavy. "That doesn't mean you're SEALs, not yet, but you've survived what most can't. Remember that." That night, for the first time in days, Sarah lay on a mattress. Real sheets, real silence. Her body ached too much to sleep, but her mind replayed every moment. The surf, the bell, the fall under the boat, the hand that had pulled her back up. And she realized something. Hell Week hadn't proven her strength to the instructors. It had proven it to herself. The rejection letters, the silence at the briefing table, the doubts whispered in corners, none of them carried weight anymore. Because she had seen the fire, and she had not broken. The next morning, when she walked across the compound, the stares were different, still skeptical, still hard, but quieter. One man even stepped aside, giving her space in the chow line. Not much, but enough. Respect like survival wasn't given, it was earned, inch by inch. And Sarah Mitchell had just taken her first. The weeks after Hell Week felt almost unreal. Sleep returned in fragments. Food tasted like food again, not fuel shoveled in between punishments. The compound no longer blurred into an endless loop of pain. But for Sarah Mitchell, survival was no longer enough. Now came the real test. The first exercise was room clearing. A shoebox-sized house, plywood walls, targets hidden in corners. Speed, precision, communication. One mistake meant the whole team failed. Sarah was placed last in the stack, the position no one wanted. The cleanup shooter, the one expected to catch what everyone else missed. The man in front of her muttered under his breath. She caught it. "Keep up or we all eat it." She didn't reply. Words wouldn't change his mind. The door kicked. Chaos erupted, shouts, boots pounding across plywood floors, shots cracked, targets dropping in rapid sequence. When her turn came, Sarah flowed through the doorway. Corners, angles, shadows. There, a target left standing behind the door, missed by all 4 men before her. She fired once, clean. The room fell silent. The instructor's voice cut through, clear. Eyes flicked back at her as the team filed out. No one spoke, but she saw it in their faces. They hadn't expected her to carry the weight. She had anyway. The days blurred into drills, breaching, demolitions, long swims in black water with only a compass and a prayer, endless miles under load. Sarah kept her silence. She didn't argue when teammates doubted her. She didn't celebrate when she outperformed them. She simply did the work. One night after a 20-mile ruck, she sat on the barracks floor unlacing boots caked with mud. Martinez dropped beside her. His face was gaunt, his body wrecked, but his grin flashed. "They're starting to shut up," he said quietly. Sarah glanced at him. "Who?" "Everyone, the ones who said you wouldn't last the week. Now they don't know what to say, so they don't." She shook her head. "They'll find something." "Maybe," Martinez said. He leaned back against the wall, eyes closing. "But they can't take this away. You're still here." 2 weeks later, they moved to the shooting range. It should have felt like home, but this wasn't the tower at camp. This was a gauntlet designed to break focus. Moving targets, shifting winds, time pressure, instructors barking in her ear. She shouldered the rifle anyway. First shot, 200 meters, target dropped. Second shot, 300, wind shift, adjust, impact confirmed. Third shot, moving target at 400, 1 miss. The instructor pounced immediately. "Mitchell, thought you were some miracle sniper, that what they told you. Out here you're just another candidate. Another miss like that and you're gone." The words burned, not because of the miss, but because she knew they wanted her to falter under it. She steadied herself, controlled her breath. The next shots came faster, 500, 600, 7, 8. Clean, precise, one after another. When she finally lowered the rifle, the instructor didn't speak, just scribbled on his clipboard. But she caught the smallest flicker in his eyes, the one that said, "I can't deny it." That night in the chow hall, sat across from her. He hadn't spoken to her once since training began. Now he muttered, almost grudgingly, 17 shots, it wasn't luck, was it? Sarah didn't answer. She didn't need to. Gave the faintest nod, then returned to his food. It wasn't friendship, not even respect, but it was the first crack in the wall. The next phase tested leadership. Each candidate was rotated into command during missions. The others judged silently. Every order, every hesitation, every failure tallied against you. Sarah's turn came during a night navigation drill. 12 miles through swamp and forest, carrying gear that doubled in weight with every step. The map was hers, the compass hers, the team hers. She could feel the weight of their skepticism, pressing harder than the pack on her shoulders. Halfway through, snapped, "We're lost, she's running us in circles." Sarah stopped. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting fractured shadows. She unfolded the map, checked her bearings, then pointed northeast. "There's a clearing in 1 mile, she said simply. "That's where the checkpoint is." Laughed bitterly, "If you're wrong." "Then we fail," she cut in, her voice was steady. "But if I'm right, we move now." Silence, then grudgingly they followed. An hour later, the checkpoint lights glowed through the trees. The instructors waited, clipboards in hand. One raised his brow. "Made it, ahead of time, too." Sarah didn't smile, but as she glanced back, she caught stare. For the first time, he didn't look through her. He looked at her. Later in the barracks, Martinez grinned again. "See, they're starting to believe." Sarah shook her head. "Belief is what gets you through. Survival does." But deep down, she felt something she hadn't before. Not belief, not even pride. Responsibility. If she faltered, every doubt, every whisper, every letter would be proven right, not just for her, for every woman who might follow. And that weight was heavier than any pack she carried. One evening, after a dive exercise, Sarah lingered on the pier. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the water in streaks of blood orange. Commander Torres approached, her steps quiet. "You're still standing," Torres said softly. Sarah exhaled, "for now." Torres studied her. "They're watching you, you know, not just the instructors, the candidates, the command, even Washington. Everyone waiting to see if you crack." "I know." "And how does that feel?" Sarah hesitated. The honest answer was complicated, heavy, lonely. But she finally said, like silence again, only louder this time. Torres nodded, "Then make them listen." The days stretched into weeks. Missions grew more complex, training more brutal. Sarah kept moving, kept carrying, kept firing. But what shifted wasn't her strength. It was the silence around her. The mutters faded, the stares softened. And one night, when exhaustion pressed them all into the dirt, Martinez's voice cut through the dark. "Mitchell, take the lead." No one argued. And that was when she realized she wasn't fighting just to belong anymore. She was already there. The simulation began at 200 hours. No warning, no briefing, just a voice in the barracks: "Gear up. Mission parameters in transit. Move." Sarah was already halfway out of bed before the others stirred. Training had rewired her reflexes. Her boots hit the floor silently. She was dressed and loaded before the rest had even found their rifles. Outside, cold air knifed through the compound. The instructors waited at the edge of the field, faces unreadable. A single truck idled beside them, engine rumbling like distant thunder. "Mission profile," one instructor barked. "Urban raid, simulated hostage extraction. 1 hour to objective, 30 minutes on site, 1 hour. Enemy combatants, unpredictable. Civilians on site. Failure to distinguish will result in disqualification." The candidates nodded, some grimly, some nervously. Sarah's face remained still. Then the instructor added, "Mitchell, your team lead." A beat of silence followed. Eyes turned, not hostile, just measuring. Sarah said nothing. She only nodded, then climbed into the truck. The ride was silent. No one spoke, though Sarah felt their unasked questions. Could she lead? Could she make the hard calls? Could she carry not just herself, but all of them through the fire? She gripped the edge of the bench as the truck rattled over dirt roads. In her head, she mapped the timeline: insertion, entry, sweep, extraction. 1 hour to objective. 1 hour to live or die in simulation. She knew it wasn't real. Knew the hostages were actors, the enemy blanks and paint rounds. But the consequences were real. They hit the ground at 3:10. The mock village sprawled in darkness ahead, plywood houses, flickering lights, shadows moving in windows. Sarah dropped to a crouch, eyes scanning the perimeter. She whispered, "Take 2 and cover the west alley. Martinez on me. We clear the main structure first. Watch for trip lines." No one argued, not anymore. They moved, quiet, fluid. Sarah's rifle swept corners, eyes flicking from shadow to shadow. At the first door she paused. Faint light glowed beneath the frame. A voice inside, muffled, agitated. She signaled. Martinez stacked behind her. 3, 2, 1. Kick. Flash. They flowed in, targets up, silhouettes shifting in the dim. Contact left. Martinez fired, paint rounds splattered. Sarah pivoted, dropped 2 silhouettes. One stood, hands up, screaming, civilian. She held fire. Heart hammering, she swept the next room, clear. Then a shout from side, "Booby trap." Too late. The detonation was loud even through simulation. A deafening bang, smoke filling the alley. The instructors' voices boomed over loudspeakers. Fatalities, 2. Mission compromised, reset. Sarah's chest tightened. They failed. Back at the compound, silence hung heavier than the dawn. The team stood at attention as the instructors dissected the mission. Failure to identify trap, inadequate spacing, loss of 2 team members, time exceeded. Mitchell, you led, explain. Sarah's mouth was dry, her voice was low even. I underestimated the secondary approach, didn't account for parallel entry, that's on me. The instructor's eyes narrowed. And what's the cost of your miscalculation? She didn't hesitate. Lives, sir. He nodded once. That's the only answer that matters, dismissed. The others dispersed slowly. Martinez lingered, but Sarah waved him off. She needed air. She walked alone to the edge of the pier. The water below was still, reflecting dawn's pale light. She stared at it for a long time. Her reflection blinked back, hollow eyes, salt crusted in her hair, fatigue dragging at every line of her face. She had led and failed. It was simulation, but the shame was real. She fought so long to prove she belonged. Now she wondered if she'd just proven the opposite. Her mind returned to Syria. That day in Aleppo when her unit had breached a school-turned-insurgent holdout. She'd been second in the stack. The point man had missed a tripwire. The explosion killed him instantly. She pulled his body out with her bare hands, screaming his name into rubble. That night she'd sat under the stars, wondering what she could have done differently. The answer had haunted her for years, everything and nothing. Some mistakes were simply the price of the fight. But here, now in training, she couldn't afford even simulated failure. Because in the real world, the mistakes wouldn't be paint rounds. That evening, Commander Torres called her into the office. Sarah braced for reprimand. Instead, Torres handed her a file. Review it, she said. Tomorrow you lead again, new simulation, new chance. Sarah opened the file. Schematics of a power station, multiple entry points, hostage in the central control room. Torres studied her. You think failure disqualifies you? Sarah didn't answer. Torres continued, voice calm. Then you've misunderstood what we're testing. We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for response. Fall, then rise. That's the standard. Sarah looked up slowly. And if I fall again? Then we see what you do next, Torres said. Because one thing's certain, the mission doesn't care how you feel, only what you do. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat in the dark, reviewing the file, memorizing every angle, every blind spot. She mapped entry routes, escape paths, fallback plans. She wrote them out on scratch paper, rewrote them again. Failure wasn't an option, not because the instructors said so, but because she couldn't bear to see her reflection in that water again. The second simulation launched at 400. Same cold air, same truck, same silence. This time Sarah didn't just lead, she commanded. Martinez, secondary ingress through the east service hatch. You're on rescue. I'll breach the front with 2. Suppressive fire only. No kills unless confirmed hostile. No civilians dropped. Her voice was steady, her plan tight. They moved like ghosts through the darkness. At the breach, Sarah counted down. 3, 2, 1. Kick. Entry. This time the rooms cleared like clockwork. Targets dropped. Civilians extracted. Then a twist, an unexpected ambush in the generator room. Sarah ducked, rolled, fired. Paint rounds splattered the wall where her head had been. Martinez flanked left. He moved, covered, neutralized. When the final hostage was pulled from the control room, the clock still had 5 minutes left. Back at the compound, the instructor didn't speak at first. He just stared at the data on his clipboard. Then quietly, no casualties, no civilian deaths, time under limit, clean sweep. A pause. Mitchell, that's what leadership looks like. That night the chow hall was quieter, but the silence had changed. No whispers, no mutters. Just quiet acknowledgement. even raised his cup in her direction. "Good call, boss." Sarah nodded once. No smile, just a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Later on the pier again, she stared at the water. Her reflection stared back, tired, weathered, but no longer doubting. She had failed, then risen. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. The final phase had no name. The instructors never called it anything more than the crucible. Candidates whispered rumors, stories passed down from class to class, endless marches, ambush drills, interrogations, sleep deprivation worse than Hell Week. No one knew the exact shape, only that it was designed to break what remained of you. Sarah Mitchell stepped off the truck with the others into a barren stretch of scrubland under a starless sky. The wind carried salt and dust. It bit her lips, stung her eyes. 72 hours, an instructor barked. Continuous operation. Missions will be fed as received. Failures will accumulate. Drop enough and you're done. Understand? They understood. Sarah tightened the straps of her pack. The same bell that had haunted Hell Week wasn't here, but in her head, she could hear it anyway. Ring it, walk away. No one would blame her after all she'd already done. She shook the thought off like sweat. 72 hours, just one more mountain. The first mission dropped them into the swamp. Waist-deep water, cold enough to seize muscles within minutes. They waded in silence, rifles balanced overhead, packs dragging them down. Sarah's legs screamed. Each step sank into the mud, sucking at her boots. She forced her breath steady, counting each exhale. 1, 2, 3. She thought of 17 shots echoing into silence. She thought of the rejection letters, 4 cold walls of text. She thought of Martinez, of the team that now, impossibly, trusted her to lead when ordered. The swamp stretched on. But so did she. At dawn, they staged an assault on a mock weapons cache. The instructors had seeded the site with traps, blanks snapping like real fire. Sarah moved point. Her eyes scanned the ground, every twig, every wire. The memory of her first failed simulation haunted her. She spotted it, fishing lines strung low across the doorway. She raised her fist, halting the team. Eased forward, eyes widening as he saw it. He looked at her, gave a sharp nod. The trap was bypassed, the objective cleared. When the instructors called mission complete, she saw something in his face she'd never expected months earlier. Relief, trust. By the second night, fatigue blurred the world. Candidates stumbled in formation, eyes half closed, some speaking nonsense under their breath. Sarah drifted between reality and memory. Syria, Iraq, the tower at the pool during drown-proofing, the cold surf pounding against her ribs. At one point, she swore she saw her father again, sitting on the edge of the swamp, watching. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said what it always had: "You're stronger than they think." She blinked and he was gone. The interrogation phase hit on the final day. Black hoods, plastic cuffs, hands yanked behind their backs. Sarah was shoved into a steel chair in a windowless room, the hood ripped away. A bright light seared her eyes. Name, rank, unit. An instructor snapped, slamming a fist onto the table. She gave it flat, controlled. "Why are you here?" The question wasn't in the manual. She hesitated. "To complete training, sir." The instructor leaned in, his voice a hiss. "Wrong. You're here because of politics, because someone upstairs wants a woman to succeed. You think your 17 shots mean anything. They don't. You're nothing but a headline, say it." Her jaw clenched, her throat burned. "Silence." The instructor slammed the table again. "Say it." She closed her eyes, inhaled once slow. 17 shots saved lives. That's all that matters, sir." A pause, the light buzzed overhead. The instructor exhaled, almost like a laugh, still standing. The hood dropped back over her head. When they were finally released, the candidates staggered into the sunlight like survivors of some ancient trial. Their uniforms were torn, faces hollow, bodies trembling from exhaustion. But they were still there. Sarah's knees nearly buckled as she stood in formation, but she locked them, spine rigid. The commanding officer stepped forward, voice carrying across the courtyard. "You have endured what few can. You are candidates no longer. You are SEALs." The words landed heavy. Applause didn't erupt, cheers didn't rise. The moment was too solemn, too raw. One by one, instructors stepped down the line, pressing tridents into trembling hands. When the pin reached Sarah, the instructor paused. His eyes searched hers. Not doubt, not disbelief, something else. Recognition. He pinned the gold emblem to her chest. "Staff Sergeant Mitchell," he said quietly, "you've earned it." That night the compound was quiet. No drills, no shouting, just silence. Sarah sat alone on the pier again, the trident heavy against her chest. She traced its edges with calloused fingers. For years, the rejection letters had told her this was impossible. For years, silence had dismissed her before she even spoke. But now the silence was different. Not doubt, not dismissal. Respect. She let the weight of it settle into her bones. And for the first time since, she allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The ceremony ended hours ago. The courtyard had emptied. The instructors, the candidates turned SEALs, even the officers had disappeared into the night. But Sarah Mitchell remained awake. She sat on the edge of her bunk, the small barracks room dim in the glow of a single lamp. The trident rested in her palm, gold gleaming against her calloused skin. She turned it slowly, watching how the light caught its edges. To anyone else, it was a symbol, honor, elite brotherhood, entry into a world few ever saw. To her, it was heavier than metal. It was every rejection letter, every whispered doubt, every silence she had endured. It was the faces of 17 insurgents, frozen in her mind's eye. It was Martinez gasping in the surf, his bitter stare slowly shifting into trust. It was failure and rise, fall and climb. It was proof that silence could be broken, not by shouting, not by protest, but by persistence. She left the barracks quietly. The night air was cool, salt-heavy. She walked without purpose until her boots found the pier again. The water stretched dark and endless beneath her. The same water she had nearly drowned in during drown-proofing. The same water that had numbed her body during Hell Week. The same water that had carried her farther than she thought she could go. She leaned against the railing, fingers still curled around the trident. For a long time she said nothing. Then softly she whispered into the night, 17 shots, 4 rejections, 1 chance. Her voice carried no triumph, only a kind of tired gratitude. She thought back to the tower, the smoke, the chaos, the impossible shots. She remembered lowering the after the 17th, the silence so sharp it had cut her deeper than recoil. That was the moment, she realized now, that had rewritten her life. Not because it had proved anything to the Navy, but because it had forced her to confront herself. When the smoke cleared, she hadn't just been the Marine who fired 17 impossible shots. She had been the woman who chose not to let silence define her anymore. In the weeks that followed graduation, the media had come circling. Stories ran headlines. First woman earned SEAL trident. Photos spread. Commentators debated. Sarah ignored them all. She didn't need their voices. She didn't need their applause. She had learned something far more valuable in silence. That recognition was never the goal. Survival was, service was, dignity was. And dignity didn't come with medals or headlines. It came in moments no one else saw. The night she whispered to herself in the barracks, "I won't quit." The instant she hauled Martinez back above the surf. The second she stood in front of the map and said, "Steady, then we fail. But if I'm right, we move." Moments where silence demanded surrender, and she refused. Martinez found her on the pier a week later. He walked with the same limp he'd carried since Hell Week, but his grin was intact. "You never sleep, do you?" he asked, sitting beside her. Not when it's quiet, she replied. He chuckled. Funny, I think that's when I finally can. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't sting anymore. Then Martinez said, told me something yesterday. Said if he ever had to pick someone to cover his six, it'd be you. That's not small coming from him. Sarah raised an eyebrow. You sure he wasn't delirious? Martinez grinned wider. Maybe, but even delirium tells the truth sometimes. Sarah let the words sink in, not because she needed them, but because they reminded her of what had changed. Not just her, everyone around her. In quiet moments, Sarah still thought about those she'd lost, the point man in Syria, the Marines pinned down in Iraq, even the 17 insurgents at. She didn't glorify the kills, she didn't deny the weight of them, she carried them all. Because that was the truth no ceremony could polish, no medal could erase. Every triumph was built on cost. And she would rather feel the weight of that cost than pretend it wasn't there. Months later, her first deployment as a SEAL came. The mission details weren't for public knowledge. They wouldn't make headlines. No one outside the team would ever know. But she didn't need them to. She shouldered her rifle, stepped into the fire again. And for the first time, she wasn't fighting for entry or proof or recognition. She was simply fighting alongside. Equal. On another night, long after that mission, Sarah found herself once again staring at her reflection in water. This time, it wasn't exhaustion or doubt she saw. It was resilience. The kind that doesn't demand attention, the kind that doesn't roar, the kind that survives. Her story spread far beyond her, whether she wanted it to or not. Young women wrote letters. Soldiers whispered her name during training. Instructors used her 17 shots as a case study in classrooms. But Sarah never chased those echoes. Because she knew the truth. What she had done wasn't about proving women could be SEALs. It wasn't about being first. It wasn't about breaking rules. It was about refusing silence. Refusing to be told what she couldn't do. Refusing to quit when her body begged for surrender. Refusing to let others decide her worth. As dawn broke over the water, Sarah finally stood, slipping the trident back onto her uniform. The horizon burned gold, light cutting through darkness. And in that moment, she knew something she hadn't before. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it doesn't demand. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.